Gemara. Boy mine rava meirab. Lina my elas baroisha shel mizbeach or einin elas or einin elas baroisha shel mizbeach. If a aver or a piece of meat or dam or whatever it is, if it was baroisha mizbeach by alois hashachar, where normally something becomes possible lina, does the mizbeach protect it from the psulina? In fact, the more hechidam, what would be the specific case? Ileme de lo yard. If it never left the mizbeach, well, then it doesn't matter, because whether it was possible in or not, you don't take it down. You're makrabit because alu lo yerdu. Hashta lonu ba'azara amrit lo yerdu. Even if it became possible lina by sitting in the azara, not on the mizbeach, still, if it was on the mizbeach, you don't take it off. But rosh shel mizbeach, if it became possible lina, but rosh shel mizbeach, miboy, surely you don't take it off. So that child is not nageya. Velo de yardu. The case must be that after alois hashachar, the aver was taken off the mizbeach. So if it became possible lina, you're not allowed to bring it back on. Do you say l'shulchan medamin? Do you say that it's like it was on the shulchan, which is matzil anything from becoming, it's matzil the lechem aponim, from becoming posel belina? Ditnan afilu hein ala shulchan yomim rabim. Even if the lechem aponim stays for an extended period of time on the shulchan, ein b'kachlo. So therefore, do you say as well that this aver that was on the mizbeach, shas alois hashachar, was protected and it didn't become possible? You know, or maybe the mizbeach is like karka because it's basically made out of stone, it's built in, it's not a keli, and therefore it would become possible. So Omerle, Rabbi answered quite clearly, Ein lina b'rosh shel mizbeach. There's no din lina. So even if there was an aver that was left on the mizbeach overnight, it doesn't become possible lina. So even if you took it off the mizbeach, you could put it back on because it didn't become possible lina. Did Rava accept the psak of Rabba? Zok the Toshma. The itmar we learned in a brisa. Evorim shalonu ba'azar. If evorim stayed overnight in the azara, makdir v'haylech kol halayla. All night long, you can continue to be makdir because they don't become possible lina until the morning. However, lonu b'rosh shel mizbeach, if they stayed overnight on the mizbeach, mikater v'haylech loyla. Once it's on the mizbeach, lo yerdu, whether it's possible lina or not doesn't matter. It remains on the mizbeach and you could burn it. But yordu, what if it was on the mizbeach overnight and it came off? That's mamash or shaila. Could you put it back on? Rabba Omer Yalu, because he holds that it didn't become possible lina by remaining on the mizbeach overnight. But Rav Omer Lo Yalu. Rava says you can't put it back on. So Shemami no, you see from here like Kibble Minei. Rava did not accept the psak of Rabba, and Rava maintains that it did become possible lina, and therefore you're not allowed to put it back on the mizbeach. Shema Mino. Zok the Gemara weiter. The Mishnah says the same way the mizbeach is mekadesh, the kevesh is mekadesh, and even the klei shores is mekadesh. Tanu Rabbanan, Hanageb b'mizbeach. Einli el mizbeach kevesh minayin. Talmud Omer es hamizbeach klei shores minayin. Talmud Omer kol hanageb b'mikdash. They all have the same property that they are mekadesh. The question is to what extent are they mekadesh, and that's what the Gemara is going to probe. Boy minei Resh Lakish Rabbi Yochanan. Klei shores mau sheyikachu es apsulim. Rashi says the halacha is if you have a mincha that was in the klei shores, a kosher mincha, and once you place it in the klei shores, it becomes kedushas a guf, like a carbon, and it becomes tamei, you cannot redeem it anymore. You have to burn it. But if you had a mincha that you did not place into a klei shores yet, meaning it's only kedushas dam and not kedushas a guf, and it became tamei, you could redeem it. So the question is, what happens if you had a mincha that was tamei and you placed it into the klei shores? Does the klei shores make it now that it's kedushas a guf? Rabbi Yochanan responded, it's a mefurish mishnah. Keshem sham mizbeach va'kevesh mekachin eseroy lahem kach kelim mekachim, and therefore it will become kedushas a guf, and you'd have to burn it. I want to know if I took mincha that's tome, I placed it into klisharis. So you said it becomes kedushas agov. The question is, now does it have the concept of olu yerdu? Once it's into klisharis, maybe now I should already be makavit as a carbon lechatchila, because the klisharis was makadosh it. Zok Rabbi Yochanan, we have a riot to that as well from our Mishnah. Hanami Tanina, from our own Mishnah, that states as follows. This, the Gemara, the Havamina Rabbi Yochanan assumes, is one single case. Shekiblu psulim v'zarku estamai. The Mishnah lists off as one of the psulim that in Olu Yerdu is if a apostle the Kohen made Kabbalah Saddam, and then that same apostle the Kohen went and made Rika Saddam. So the question is, why wouldn't it have been enough if apostle the Kohen was just Mekabel the Dam, and the kosher Kohen made this Rika Saddam? It should still be possible. Elamai, since the Mishnah select the case, not only did the apostle Mekabel the Dam, he also made Rika Saddam. It must be that if apostle made Kabbalah Saddam, even though that's apostle the Kabbalah, but once the Dam is in the Klisharis, now lechatchila you're allowed to go make this Rika Saddam. So it only became possible because the Rika was done through a Kohen possible. Zok the Gemara, my lav shekiblu psulim v'zarku psulim, and then you have a raya that the Klisharis, the Mizrak that was Mekabel the Dam, is machshurit lechatchila that you could do a Rika. Zok the Gemara, no, it's two completely separate cases. Lo shekiblu psulim, if psulim were Mekabel the Dam, even if a kosher made Rika, that passes the carbon. And the case of Bizarku is a separate case. Inami shenizraku psulim, shezarku psulim, meaning the Kabbalah was done properly by a kosher kohen, and only the Zrika was done by a apostle kohen. It's one or the other. It's two separate cases, so you don't have a raya from here. The Gemara was not poshet the shaila as to whether or not Kleshares will be misakin the psulim that you should go and make Zrika. But the Gemara transitions now to another shaila. Avar mizbeach k'mizbeach dami oiloi. What if you have a vorim that are psulim, says them olu lo yerdu? Well, what if they're not on the surface of the mizbeach? What if they're hovering in the airspace of the mizbeach? For instance, a kohen is holding the meat, so it's not touching the surface of the mizbeach; it's in the airspace. Does it also have a din of him olu lo yerdu? Zakmor Toshma. Our Mishnah says, "Keshem shemizbeach mekadesh kach kevesh mekadesh." Now, if the kevesh is mekadesh and him olu lo yerdu, how are you going to get the meat from the kevesh to the mizbeach? The kohen is going to have to pick it up and walk to the mizbeach. But once you pick it up, it's already out of the mizbeach because we're already at the point where it's in the airspace of the mizbeach. It's not on the mizbeach directly anymore. The amrit, and if you say the amrit avar mizbeach lav k'mizbeach dummy, if you're going to say avar k'mizbeach is lav k'mizbeach, well, an avir kevesh nami lav k'kevesh dummy. So the question is, heichi masik leimi kevesh l'mizbeach. How are you going to get the meat from the kevesh l'mizbeach? You're going to have to take it through the airspace. Havalo yerud. If the airspace is not k'mizbeach, it's as if it went off the mizbeach. And then im yardu lo yalu. So tomorrow that's not a kasha. Then nuggetlay. Who said you have to lift it up to get it from the kevesh onto the mizbeach? Drag it along. But if you drag it along, there's still a gap of air in between the kevesh and the mizbeach. The kevesh didn't touch the mizbeach, and as the meat transitions over that gap, it's in airspace. Fighter, it should become possible via aver yesh ben kevesh l'mizbeach. Zoktamar, that's not a problem because you don't look at every sliver of meat as if it's a standalone item, and that little sliver, each little sliver, as it goes over the gap, it's now ba'avir yesh l'mizbeach. No, you say rubay lekevesh kekevesh, rubay lemizbeach kemizbeach. It's one piece of meat that's combined. If most of the meat is on the mizbeach, we say that it's like a piece of meat is on the mizbeach. If most of it is on the kevesh, it's on the kevesh. But you definitely don't look at it that each little piece is different, and therefore one small part of it that's over the airspace would become possible. So you're basically telling me that whenever you look at a meat of a carbon, you don't look at it like it's a whole bunch of small pieces. You look at it as one big piece. That's a shaila that Rami Bar Chama had. Are you telling me Tivshet Meha Ha the boy Rami Bar Chama Yesh Chibur La'ila Noiloi? Are you telling me Tivshet the Yesh Chibur? Are you telling me that you're passing the shaila that Rami Bar Chama asked? So Gemara, that's exactly what I'm doing. Yes, we are being poished the shaila of Rami Bar Chama, and we're saying that you look at every piece as one large piece, and you located Basar where its roiv is, and never will the roiv of this piece be right over the gap, and therefore there's no psul of having left the mizbeach. So we still don't have a raya if aver hamizbeach k'mizbeach. So the Gemara tries another raya. Maskav lo Rabba bar Avchan. The amrit aver mizbeach k'mizbeach dami. If you're going to tell me that aver mizbeach is k'mizbeach dami, oilas ha'oif the posla b'machshava hechi mishkachas. How can you ever have pigul of oilas ha'oif? Where is the malika done for the oilas ha'oif? On top of the mizbeach. So what happened? He made malika, and he had das that he's going to spritz the blood of this oila or be makter its meat tomorrow. That's pigul. But the problem is, if he actually did that, it would be perfectly fine. Because if he's on top of the mizbeach, it never becomes possible and it remains on the mizbeach. So therefore, how could you say a machshava to be makter the meat tomorrow will be a machshava of pigul? If you actually do that, it would be a perfectly kosher carbon. So, Frank the Gemara, Heiche Mishkachas, the Hakol to Mizbeach. If you hold Avram Mizbeach, Mizbeach, Tami. Elamai, Avram Mizbeach is not Mizbeach, and when you're holding the bird in the air, it's not on the Mizbeach, and therefore it will be come pigul. Zog to Gemara, that's not a kasha. You don't have a right from here that Avram Mizbeach is Lavka Mizbeach, because I'll tell you what would be a case where there would be pigul, even if you held Avram Mizbeach, Mizbeach, Tami. Maskav lo Rabbi Barashi, Alama lo mishkachas lo, going to Amar, Hareni moilka almanas lo yirida lemocher ula haloisa ulaktira. Yes, as long as it remained on the mizbeach, even in the Avraham mizbeach, it won't become possible. But maybe the machshavas pigul was, I'm going to take it off the mizbeach tomorrow morning, and now it's already possible. I'm not allowed to bring it back on, and that's the machshavah pigul. This would be great according to Rava, who holds that even though it was on the Mizbech by Aloisa Shachar, it still becomes possible lina. And therefore, if after Aloisa Shachar I took it off the Mizbech, I'm not allowed to put it back on, that would be a great example of how you can have a chutz money that would be possible, and therefore a machshavas pigul. But according to Rabba, even if you left it on the Mizbech overnight, it does not become possible lina. And if you took it off the mizbeach, you could bring it right back on again. So how would you have a machshava pigul? Lecha lesel machshavtoi. So that's not a problem. Le rabba nami mishkachas lo going to Amar Hareni Moilka Almanas Larida Koidem Amud Shachar Ula Haloisa Laachar Amud Shachar. You know what the case could be? The case really Avram is Be'ech. But he said, I'm making the malika now, and I have in mind that I'm going to take it off the mizbeach before Aloisa Shachar. Therefore, it'll become noiser when Aloisa Shachar hits, and then I'm illegally going to bring it back on the mizbeach. That would be possible, and therefore, since that would be possible, will be also to bring back up. That would be a perfect example of pigul. Zog to Gemara, you tried to bring me a raya that Avraham mizbeach lav mizbeach, and you failed. Now I'm going to bring a raya in the opposite direction. That Avraham Mizbeach is Kimizbeach. Mia Tivshoit, the Avraham Mizbeach Kimizbeach Tami. What's the proof? These are the Avraham Mizbeach Lav Kimizbeach Tami. If you're going to know that the Avraham Mizbeach is Lav Kimizbeach Tami, how could you ever have a Chatas Ha'oif that would be possible? Now, a Chatas Ha'oif, if you made, you're supposed to make the Malika on the ground. But if you made the malika on top of the mizbeach, that would be kosher. So what if somebody made he made malika on a chatas, and when he made the malika, it was shaloi lishma. So we know a chatas that's brought shaloi lishma, it will be possible. Now the problem is chatas ha'oif pesula heichi maza midama. How could you spritz his blood? Because we know the halacha is the Mishnah says a chatas ha'oif pesula. Right? So you have a chatazoi psula because you made malika shaloi l'shma. Since it's on top of the mizbeach, our Mishnah told us you don't take it off. In other words, you can continue doing the zrika. But how could you do the zrika? If you hold Avram mizbeach lav mizbeach tummy, that means the bird is touching the mizbeach the whole time. How could you spritz it? Havela yorud. In order to make zrika, you can't have the bird on the mizbeach. You have to lift it up in the air and squeeze it out so it should spritz. And once you lift it off the surface of the mizbeach, vibalt aver kemizbeach is lav kemizbeach domi. It's going to be puzzle, and now you can't put it back anymore. Or never mind by chat the by sharp tulim. Anytime you have dam that became puzzle, you have dam that was lod, you have dam that was yoytze. Heichi zorklu midama. If it got onto the mizbeach, where you say Malu lo yerdu, how could you make this rika? You're going to have to lift it off and spritz towards the mizbeach. It's got to be airborne. So therefore, how are you ever going to be able to continue that carbon? So what do you mean Malu lo yerdu? You can't continue to process it. Elamai, what are you going to say? The magalu, you keep it connected to the mizbeach the whole time and you spritz it while it's connected. Ha azahi, that's not azah. Mitzuhi. If the bird's touching the mizbeach the whole time and you squeeze it, that's squeezing it out. That's not called azah. Azah means it's airborne. Or with the dam of a behema. Hazrika shvichahi. If the keli is touching the mizbeach the whole time and you're just dumping it on, that's not shvicha, that's shvicha. So v'oit v'chidarch azah bekach. That's not the right way to do azah. Derech zrika bekach. Is that the way to do zrika? So therefore, the question will be the Mishnah that says dam that became possible. How do you process it? It wouldn't work. Elamai, you have to say that Avram Mizbeach is Kim Mizbeach Tami. And therefore, even though it's airborne, it's still considered on the Mizbeach, and therefore you can make this rika. So you have a right that Avir Mizbeach, Kim Mizbeach Tami. Zokt, Rabashi, no. That's not our Shaila. You're talking about a guy who's standing on the Mizbeach, holding the bird, holding the dam. That's not Avir Mizbeach. Amar Rabashi, the Nokat Lubaroisha Mizbeach, Hachanami. If you're talking about someone who's holding something in his hand, standing on the mizbeach, that's not Avram mizbeach. It's anchored to the mizbeach through his body. He's holding the bird and he's on the mizbeach. That's not what we mean by Avram mizbeach. Our shaila is kika amar the talinu bakanya. The kohen standing on the floor, not on the mizbeach, and there's a big fishing rod, and hanging off the fishing rod is the dam, is whatever it is that we want to say is on the mizbeach. So it's literally hanging in the airspace of the mizbeach with no anchor to the mizbeach itself. That's the shaila if aver mizbeach to mizbeach tabi. My zok teku, and for that we don't have a raya. Okay, Baruch Hashem, we were zoicha to finish daf pezayin, which is puz. The Torah has to be delicious and sweet like puz. And tomorrow we're going to learn daf peches.